Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. It's your boy D Black coming back to you with another SmackDown review. All right, SmackDown tonight. It was lifeless and lame. I mean, I can't understand what was going on tonight. I think every match meant nothing. All this stuff was just thrown together, and tomorrow we have Backlash. And hopefully, Backlash will be better than what happened tonight on SmackDown. All right, let's get to it. All right, first we have Jacob Fatu coming out saying that, Backlash, he's not just fighting for the title, but at Backlash, he's going to take the title. Saying when they were, saying when him and Roman, when they were young, he was overlooked, the Roman Reigns, they were seeing him as the future and stuff. And they was basically telling Fatu, Jacob Fatu, to fall back in line all his life, and let the leaders of the bloodline or of the family, take charge, which is now, Roman Reigns, you know, um, and he feels like everybody's just just disrespecting him and don't believe in him and don't believe that he can take Roman out, but actually he's actually saying that he's going to be the one that's going to dethrone Roman Reigns. He's no playing no joke. Then he then the Usos come out basically telling Jacob that they're not out here today to tell Jacob to change his mind because all that's done. It's too late. Tomorrow's backlash, and that it's not going to work with him. You know taking a back step as far as facing Roman. And Jay is telling Jacob that he lived the situation because about a year ago, a little over a year ago, that Jacob was fighting Roman for world championship, and then Jacob's lost. I'm not Jacob, but Jay has lost all the matches, and Jacob reminded him of that, saying that he thinks that he's all that, but he's never beaten Roman Reigns, talking about losing and stuff, and then basically Jimmy's telling Jacob that when he gets in the ring with Roman, that Roman's gonna, whoop his butt. He's gonna handle him and everything, and that and all that time is that his family's gonna be embarrassed and everything. They're gonna watch him get beat and stuff. And then Jacob's basically saying that look, well before that, Jimmy's telling him that when Jacob gets beat by Roman, that him and his family is going to have to acknowledge Roman, and Jacob's not up with that acknowledging anything and stuff like that, and telling that by the end of Backlash that he's going to be the new WWE Heavyweight Champion and stuff, and nobody in his family is going to be you know accepting Roman Reigns, you know um, as the tribal chief and stuff. And then how Jacob says, just remember, he's all gas and no brakes, and tells the Usos, if they come down and interfere and cause him to lose the match, he said that he was going to burn the whole family down, and then he walks off. Wow, so Jacob is really meaning business. So I think that might probably be the best match tomorrow night, because I'm waiting to see because, it's been he's put that Samoan death grip, on Roman. So we're gonna see what's happening here with this. It's gonna be interesting. I believe Roman is still gonna win the match, but we'll see what happens. It should be a pretty good one. But I'm sure there's gonna be some foolery going on in that match. Not knowing by who, but there's gonna be some craziness going in that match and stuff. And then we get, Kathy and Nick Aldis, and they're talking about, you know, um, Gunther, and then Nick is telling what Gunther did to Cody last week was unacceptable and stuff. And then Ricky Saints comes out saying They should be talking about him, because he's the new thing and everything and stuff like that, and that he stood toe to toe, with QB number one, meaning Cody, and now he's got to go up against QB number four, which he's meant by Matt Cardona, and then Matt Cardona comes out and tells him like, look, he tells Ricky Saints that he's not putting him over, he's not no chump and everything, and that he'll see him in the ring and stuff. So that match will be later on, in the show. And then Royce Key, and Jacob Fatu there. Royce is telling Jacob, um, remember, things like he said before about being back in the hood and stuff like that. And he's telling Jacob, to bring out the Samoan werewolf and do his thing while he's facing, Roman, because, he can see, that Jacob can win and just go take the opportunity, do the best with it, and then he reminded Jacob like he's all gas and no brakes. So we'll see what happens with that and everything. And then Solo Sokoa comes up to Roy's Keys, and he's telling what happened last week when they jumped Jacob Fatu, and Roy's Keys was there, so he kind of got bumped in the in the mix too. But he said that it wasn't meant for him. The attack wasn't meant for him. It was meant for Jacob Fatu. And then he goes on to tell Royce Keys that it's not too late, that, if he thinks about it, just come join him, and his family. And then Royce Keys, just looks at him and he walks off and they face each other again. Toma Tunga and Royce Keys face each other later on in the segment. Then we have Tiffany Stratton versus Kiana James. The match is okay and stuff. Julia kind of gets involved. Tiffany takes care of that. And then it ends up with, Tiffany doing the prettiest moonsaw to Kiana James. And then Julia gets into Kiana James's face. And so there's some problems going on between Kiana James and Julia. So Tiffany wins the match with the prettiest moonsaw, and we move on. Then we got the segment with Rhea Ripley, Alexa Bliss, and Charlotte, Flair, saying that the fatal influence, made a big mistake when they attacked them last week and stuff like that, and then Rhea's, basically saying that, hey, look, together we could take them and beat them down, and Charlotte Flair in return says, as a team we can do it, but I think that's the same thing Rhea just said. So, but anyway, they was on it tonight and everything, and so Alexa, and I mean Charlotte and then Rhea kind of get into each other, kind of get into it, and then Alexa she steps in between them, and she tries to make the peace. And she said, come on, let's go out and let's take care of business and stuff. So then later on, I mean, as we go on after that segment, you have Damian Priest and R-Truth, and Damian Priest is telling R-Truth, with his match that he has later on tonight, with Talla Tunga, he's telling R-Truth not to come out, because R-Truth got hurt last week when they attacked him and stuff, and then if he comes out, then they could use him, and for him to be tied up for trying to rescue the truth, R-Truth, and it could cause him and stuff. So he's basically telling R-Truth not to show up, to come out, so nothing will happen, to his shoulder or anything else. Then we get the match with Damian Priest and Talla Tunga and stuff. The match is going on. It's pretty halfway decent and stuff like that. And at some point, you knew that there was going to be some foolery and stuff, and Tama Tunga comes out and stuff, and him and Solo try to interfere in the match, and then R-Truth, he comes down to the ring and stuff. He kind of handles business a little bit, and then he gets caught and stuff, and then R-Truth goes out to try to help, R-Truth and Damian Priest is trying to tell him R-Truth that he told him to stay back in the back, so none of what's happening would be happening and stuff. And so as he's trying to get into the ring, he gets nailed and stuff, and the Talla Tunga gets him back into the ring, gets Damian back in the ring. He gets him in the choke slam, and he pins Damian Priest. Talla Tunga wins the match. And then as they won the match, they try to jump um, Solo Sokoa, Tama Tunga, and Talla Tunga try to jump, Damian Priest, and R-Truth jumps in the ring and he tries to, protect Damian Priest. And then Royce Keys comes out, and helps him out. And then after that match, then we have a little something with Danhausen. You can see him playing with some stuff like a science project and everything. Well, not that part. He was trying to, figure out who he's going to be as his tag team partner and everything, kind of like soliciting for that. And then the Miz and Kit Wilson come out and tell him that, nobody's going to be tagging with him because he has no friends and stuff like that. And Danhausen, says he has friends and stuff. And then Kit Wilson tells Danhausen the only person that will, tag with him would be Danhausen himself. And then Danhausen says, hey, that's a good idea. And then we move on, excuse me, with Paul Heyman and Nick Aldis. And Nick Aldis is handing, and then Gunther comes in, and Nick Aldis is handing the contract, to Gunther, and he said, welcome to, SmackDown and stuff. And then Cody Rhodes, starts coming out to the ring, and Gunther sees him on the camera. And then Gunther gives the contract back to Nick Aldis and tells Nick Aldis that, that he's the star and everything. And while it's Cody coming out, while he's, going to sign the contract, and then he hands the contract back and says he's not going to sign it. Then Cody comes out and he's talking about Gunther, and he's telling Gunther, um, when he attacked him and stuff like that, and tells Gunther to come out, to the ring, and and they can see why, figure out what happened and why he came out, and attacked him. And then, as we know, Paul Heyman comes out, um, saying that he has a contract, but Cody stops him, and then Cody asks Paul Heyman, like, is he Gunther's advocate? And then Paul Heyman says, no, that he's not his advocate. He said he got the contract, to as a favor, to Gunther and stuff. And he promised Gunther that, he would get, a title match. But how I don't understand how Paul Heyman has that kind of power to even make that kind of move and make that promise, to Gunther and stuff, And then Paul Heyman goes on and tells Cody, since he ruined everything, that the match is going to be a title match. And it's not going to be here in the United States. It's going to be Clash of Champions in Italy and stuff. And then he tells Cody, since he messed up everything, if you want Gunther to sign the contract, then he needs to have Gunther come, make him sign the contract. So Cody, tells Paul Heyman, that, because of how Paul Heyman is, he told him that Brock Lesnar left him, Roman Reigns left him, CM Punk left him, and stuff like that, and then Paul, tells him, sooner or later, it doesn't matter who left him, but he says sooner or later, they come looking for him. Now, I don't know if that means somewhere down the line that could be Cody, if Cody turns heel or whatever the case may be, but it was left open for that, you know. And then after that, then Gunther tries to attack Cody, but Cody was kind of ready for it. And then they start fighting, they start brawling and everything. Gunther's out of the ring and stuff. And then Cody says to Gunther, as he's been saying, he's easy to find and hard to beat. So then we get to the match with Matt Cardona and Ricky Saints. This match really sucked and stuff. It's like I said, these matches are thrown together. And I don't understand, you know. So it was a lame night for SmackDown. But anyway, um, Ricky Saints, ends up beating Matt Cardona. And then we got Tama Tunga backstage is telling Royce Keys, you know, telling Solo that Royce Keys is going to be a problem. And Solo saying that he could be a good, fit in for the family. And then Tama Tunga says, Royce Keys is, it's embarrassed and an embarrassment. And, he could be, you know, a not good thing. And then he goes and he tells Solo like, look, I'm just gonna go out to the match, and do my thing and take care of that situation. So later on, Royce Keys and Tama Tonga have a match. Then we got Rhea, um, Bree, and Paige coming out and stuff, and they're talking about um, what happened to them with Fatal Attraction and stuff like that. And then they want Fatal Attraction to come out. So Fatal Attraction comes out. They look at Bree and Paige and everything, and basically Bree and Paige, sorry, Fatal Attraction tells Paige and Bree to leave the ring so they can show them what a real team can do. And then out comes Nia Jax and Lash Legend. And Fatal Attraction, they tell Fatal Attraction, to step back and to get back at the end of the line and stuff. And then all of a sudden, Lash and Nia take out Paige and Bree. Oh man, so they get out of the ring after beating, Paige and Bree up and stuff. And then as they're going, Lash steps up. As Rhea comes out, Lash steps up to Rhea in her face, and they have a little standoff and stuff. And then you get the match with Fatal Influence against Alexa Bliss, Charlotte Flair, and Rhea Ripley. I mean, the match, it was not too bad. I mean, it was okay and stuff. Rhea took a lot of heat in the match and everything, stuff like that. But as the match went on and progressed, Jade Cargill, she comes out, she pulls Rhea's leg, and then Rhea hits the stairs and stuff like that and everything. And then Fallon Henley, not Fallon Henley, but JC James hits Alexa with the rolling encore, and she pins Alexa and stuff. And then from there, um, Jade is taking out Rhea, and then Charlotte tries to come in, tries to get in, and then B-Fab and Meechin, they take her out, and then they take Alexa out, and they beat them up and stuff like that. So that's how that ends and stuff. We have Jade Cargill, Meechin, and B-Fab standing strong in the ring. And Fatal Attraction just steps out. Fatal Influence steps out the ring. Then we got Royce Keys with the Usos, and then Jay's telling Royce Keys, to stay out of the family business, that they know that him and Jacob go a long way and stuff like that. And then Jay tells him to stay out of the family business before he catches eyes with Roman. Then we had the match with Tama Tunga and Royce Keys. The match was, it was okay. I mean, it wasn't anything exciting or whatever the case may be. Like I said, all the matches were thrown together. But ended up, Royce Keys wins the match with a spine buster. There was a couple of times in the match where Talla Tunga wanted to interfere, and then Solo was holding him back. He was telling him to let Tama Tunga, do his thing, see what he's working with, and stuff like that. But in the end, like I said, spine buster from Royce Keys wins the match. And then we get Danhausen and everything kind of like brewing up some stuff, saying that, this should be his, when he's done, Saturday, his tag team partner will be revealed, at Backlash in Tampa. And then you got a backstage event with Toma Tunga, Shinsuke Nakamura comes out, and I thought Shinsuke was fired from the show. But anyway, was telling Tama Tunga that he was ashamed of him. And then Talla Tunga comes out and tells Shinsuke Nakamura to stay away from his brother, or else he's going to be having some problems and stuff. And then we get the most silliest, dumb thing I've ever seen on SmackDown. We get Trick Williams, you know, with Nick Aldis, and Nick Aldis is telling Trick Williams that you know he can go. He has the rest of the show at the end of towards the end of the show. The time to give respects to the gingerbread man. And then Trick Williams comes out and everything. He has this little flask in his hand and stuff like that. And then he pours, a little drink out, for the gingerbread man, you know, and stuff, And then Sami Zayn comes out, saying that this was dumb, it's stupid, it's a waste of time. How does SmackDown, have this happen? How does WWE allow this to go on as far as, the show and then wasting time with the BS of, a gingerbread man, you know, um, that there's no respect and everything, anymore for the business and stuff like that. And then, the fans, they boo him and stuff like that. And, they start chanting, whip that trick, you know. Um, and then Sammy goes on to tell Trick Williams that, at Backlash, that he's going to beat him, he's going to embarrass him and stuff, And as Sammy get ready to leave, then he hits Trick and he knocks Trick down. Then they start brawling and starts beating him up and everything like that. And then Sammy starts holding the belt up and everything. And then the gingerbread man, he rises up, from inside the coffin. And then he takes off the hood and it's Little Yachty. And then Little Yachty comes out. He has a sugar cane, kendo stick and everything. And he beats the tar out of Sami Zayn with it. And then Trick Williams hits Sami Zayn with the trick shot, leaves him laying and stuff. So that's that. Tomorrow's Backlash. And I hope Backlash is going to be a whole lot better than what SmackDown put out for us today, because it sucked. It was lifeless and it was lame. All right. Whew. And with that, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, leave a comment. Let me know how you're feeling and stuff like that, and tell me what you thought about the show and stuff. But anyway, thank you for watching. God bless. Deuces. And I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.